Hello everyone and welcome back to Psycho Sans Podcast. I am your host Alex Ostrowski, and today I want to talk about why experience matters in the world of stand-up paddleboarding, as well as just any sport or anything that you want to do. Because again, when it comes to sports, time is really the biggest part of it, in my opinion at least. I mean, you can obviously speed up your process, and if you have just like this raw talent, you can just pick it up immediately. But when it comes to developing your skills and learning new things, I definitely think that time has a big thing to play in it. And I specifically in this episode, I want to talk about time. And intertwined, it's just experiencing different conditions and different types of competitions and even equipment sometimes. I used to horseback ride, and when I would do horseback riding, I would always be put on different horses, and every single horse is different, obviously, and so I learned to adapt and to learn how different types of horses work, so whenever I was put on a new one, I could immediately adapt to the horse and understand how he worked, and then when I would go from that horse to my horse, when I would ride him, I would take the knowledge I learned from riding all of the other horses and how they worked and translated it onto my horse, and so I was able to understand him more as a result. I definitely think that that's kind of almost the same when it comes to stand-up paddleboarding. Learning different equipment, going in different conditions, you learn a little bit from everywhere all the time, and then you translate that into what you do most commonly. That's one thing, but also, and when it comes to this episode, I really just want to get into the time aspect of how to paddleboarding, and also kind of talk about how I developed my technique, because my technique did not start well. I mean, I'll go into it, but it definitely took me a very long time to even develop even a good technique, and I'm still learning, and I will always be learning. But yeah, I want to go into that for sure. Before I start, I want to do a little recap as to what I've been doing recently. The past week, I kind of just let myself rot, to be honest. I didn't do anything. I didn't really work out, and unfortunately, I didn't want that to happen. I don't want it to happen, but I was going at 100% after my trip to Italy, so that amount of time going 100%, I kind of just needed to just bleh for a little bit, and I wish I kind of bleh a little more productively instead of just binge watching Bridgerton. I watched part 2 of season 3, and then I rewatched season 1 and season 2, and now I'm rewatching Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story. So there was that. And also, it's been cloudy the past week and a half, 2 weeks, and it's been cloudy and rainy, and whenever it's cloudy and rainy, my motivation, my drive, my discipline just goes because I'm just so sad. Like, I need the sun. And today it's sunny, which is awesome. And I also just want to say that if you hear the cicadas through the microphone, I apologize profusely. I cannot control the cicadas. Last night, actually, one decided to land right at my window and decided to shriek, and it was so loud, and I could not get him to leave my window. It wasn't the worst thing in the entire world, but those things are loud, so if you hear them, my sincerest apologies. I cannot control that. But trust me, I do feel guilty for not posting an episode last week, because I don't know why, like, in the time that I've made my podcast, even if I was struggling during the week, or I was struggling to find motivation, I would still post a podcast episode, but for some reason I didn't do it this time. That's something that I'm gonna have to fix in the future. Though I have a lot of things planned, just because it is the half of the year, and I just want to kind of go through a little summary. Okay, I'm ranting. I'm getting sidetracked. Let's go into the topic of this episode. To start it off, I want to start with a little story to kind of just put into perspective what I'm going to be talking about. I started paddleboarding in 2016, but I didn't really get noticed in Mexico until 2021. So yeah, by that time I essentially had like 5 to 6 years of experience already, whereas a lot of people were kind of just starting to paddleboard, and also all of the other paddlers that had started paddling when I started paddling were no longer paddling, really, especially the girls. I was essentially the only girl that was left standing. And so when I went to my first Gonade in 2021, no one came close to me when I was competing. And that was just simply because I had more experience than all the other competitors. All the other competitors kind of only had like less than a year of experience. And because I was winning, a lot of states I'm thinking specifically coaches, but I can only assume that there's also a few of the competitors saying this too. Not to my face, but just to each other, basically saying that I should not be competing in a Mexican competition when I am not Mexican. When we all know that had I not been winning, they would have not said that. And I was fully qualified to compete in those races, might I add. The reason why I was winning was simply because by the time that the other competitors were learning to balance on their board and learning to go through waves, I had already gone through 1 to 2 technique revisions. I had gone to the PPG, I had paddled the Graveyard, the Carolina Cup. I had done all these things, and so of course that experience and time of me paddling translated into my competition and into my performance at the competition. And that kind of just goes to show how important experience is in SVP and just any sports and just in general, because had I not experienced all of that leading to my first Conade, I wouldn't have done good. I would have been right with all the other competitors. And this is no diss on to the other competitors. I want to make that clear. I'm just kind of simply showing or just talking about how having 5 years of more experience than the other competitors clearly helped me in these events. So now I want to kind of get into my history of my technique and my experience and how I really developed it. When I first started paddling, I was originally just taught how to paddle. To paddle and to paddle fast, I was barely ever taught like actual technique. And when I was taught technique, I'd say about a year into my paddling, my coach taught me that when you insert your paddle into the water, you want to insert it at a neutral angle. When you hear that, obviously you're like, wait, what? What do you mean a neutral angle? But that's just how he paddled. And he got second in the ISA World Championships, the long distance, in 2015. So obviously what he was doing worked for him, and that's what he taught us as students. And then a few years later, in 2019, when I was preparing for my very first gorge, I worked with another individual who also used to paddle, and he introduced the positive angle to us. And when we told him that we were taught to paddle in a neutral angle, he was like, really? Like, really? And we're like, yep. Oopsies. And so with him training us for the gorge, he introduced us to the positive angle, and he also introduced us to downwind. He taught us downwind and also learning to catch bumps, whether there was downwind or not. And for the next several years, I would pick up bits and bobs from different people. I remember I learned how to the word in Spanish is timonear, but it's essentially placing your paddle at different angles to control your board instead of just like zigzagging. And I didn't really know that until 2021, which was like 5 to 6 years into my paddleboarding. And I learned it from canoe paddlers, because obviously they paddle only on one side, so they have to learn how to do that because they can't be switching sides to right themselves. So I learned how to do that, and obviously I eventually learned to draft and properly catching waves, going over waves, and I would pick up tips from different people, and I would watch videos of myself and analyze them and compare them to other paddlers and just constantly work on my technique and work on improving it and just work on getting stronger. But also during this time, I was also kind of just in the thought process of, oh, I'm going to do me and I'm not going to let anyone else tell me what to do. So whenever someone would give me advice that I didn't necessarily think that they should be giving advice. So when I would receive advice from my peers or even my brother, I'm sorry, Trace, I'd be like, yeah, whatever, I'm not going to be taking advice from you because I thought that I knew better than them. And that was just me being young. So obviously I can't blame myself that much because when you're a teenager, you think that you know everything. And I also felt like I didn't need the advice, but age and time really humble you, and eventually I essentially just accepted the fact that I could take these points and constructive criticism. I could actually take it and then I could input it into my paddling however I liked, whether I chose to use it, to not use it, or to just cherry pick. I ended up taking advice that genuinely helped me and is helping me grow and has helped me grow since I learned about them. And this year, I thought that I had finally reached a point in my technique where I'm like, yes, I'm good to go. This is great. I'm doing awesome. And then I started consistently paddling with Christian Andersen and Subdoc, and I'm like, wait, there's a lot more that I need to learn. I noticed a lot of places where I was lacking. I noticed a lot of parts of my technique where it wasn't as productive or it wasn't as sustainable or useful doing it the way I did in comparison to the way that they were doing it. And so it kind of really put into perspective of like, okay, the way that I'm doing it isn't the best way to do it. I'm doing fine, but there is something that I can tweak, I can change a little bit, I can adapt something to where I get more out of it. I also had a technique private with Christian Andersen where I learned even more. And y'all, I learned to use my back and my chest. Who would have thought I learned how to use that? A lot of times when people would say like, oh, I use my back, or oh, I use my core, or I use my chest, I'm always like, yeah, okay, they can do it, but like, it's fine if I don't know how to do it. It's fine if I can't do it. I'll just use my arms. Newsflash, Alex, that's not going to last you that long. But the private with Christian, I was actually able to learn how to use my back. That was such an amazing realization, and I was so happy to figure that out and to realize that and finally learn how to do it so I could actually give my arms a rest when I was paddling. And then after that, I thought I was finally good, and then I got a technique analysis by Itze Delgado, and I learned even more, and he essentially just dumped a ton of information. He was like, you can take whatever you want out of this. Just here's everything that I know. He made me realize that since my injury, I hadn't really been using my knees. Or just my legs. I hadn't really been bending my legs as much as I should have. And when I actually realized this and started bending my legs more, I realized how much more power in my stroke I had, and this was a habit that I developed because of my injury. I just didn't want to bend my knees because it would hurt, so I just didn't bend my knees. So that is something that I am still working on right now, and I'm doing like exercises in the gym and everything to kind of get that muscle memory back to where it was. But yeah, every single time that I think I'm good with something, I'm done developing my technique, there's always something else. And I think that's actually, it's very relieving. Not relieving, okay, what's the word? Or I'll just brain dump this. It's so nice to know that there will never be an endpoint, and a lot of people probably think that it's just esperante, like it's just, what's the word in English? Like they feel like there's no end goal, so they get impatient. When I kind of like the fact that there's no end goal, because there's constantly room for improvement. There's constantly something to work on, and I really like that. I've been pointing that out a lot recently in my podcast episodes, but just the fact that there's always something to improve on, it makes me really happy, and there's always just a little challenge for me to do. And all of this to say, my technique isn't just from one place. It is from so many different places. It is from Mexico, USA, Denmark, Peru, even Spain, because I trained a little bit with Duna Gordillo back at the Carolina Cup, and I learned a lot from her too. I've learned from Juliette Duhaime. I've learned from everyone. I've learned so much. Oh my god, I keep on saying I learned. And I would have never developed my technique, and I would have never changed, and I would have never improved so much had I just stayed with the same person or didn't take on other people's advice or criticism or just changing anything. And I've had 8 years. Well, I've been paddling for 8 years now. I have had 8 years to develop my technique, and I'm still working on it. I am still changing and improving, and there's always something that I need to get better at. In the earlier months of this year, a big challenge for me was learning to stand on my board, because it was a new board. I got the 2023 RS, when I was originally riding like the 2018-2019 RS, the center of balance was completely different from what I was used to, and I struggled so much at the beginning of the year figuring out how to get on that board. And I'm finally at a place where I can actually stand on it. Yay! And who knows how long, few weeks, few months, I am going to be receiving the RST. That'll be a whole other learning experience too. It's never going to be linear. It's never going to be easy. Maybe easy for some, aka my brother. He can like get on any board and like pick it up immediately. What the heck? I'm so jealous. But anyways, I do want to say that it does kind of stress me out, or not stress me out, but it's disappointing when Mexico took paddlers to the World Championships, to the ISA, whom only had been paddling for a year, and then they were disappointed, and like the federation was disappointed when they didn't perform as well as they expected. It's like, well, what was supposed to happen? Were they supposed to win after 1 year of paddling in the World Championships? No. There's people that they competed against that had been paddling for almost their entire lives. So, and then when I joined the Coronado circuit 5 years into my paddling career and I won, like, what did you expect? What were they expecting? What were they expecting me to be at the same level as people who had just started paddling, who had just transferred from an all-around board to a race board? Like, come on. And don't take this as me talking down on these paddlers. I was at the exact same position they were when I started paddling. I started with an all-around board and I did my very first competition on an all-around board. Knowledge takes time, and the biggest way that you can improve is just time on the water. And that comes with time, and you have to just consistently do it, and you can't expect to be perfect immediately. I know that I felt the exact same thing when I got my new board. It was just very stressful, and I got impatient, and it was annoying, and just blah, blah, blah. But everything comes with time. And that, my friends, is why experience matters. That is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you guys later. Bye-bye.